Picture a city so beautiful that men have wept just looking at it. Not metaphorically, actually stood in piazzas and cried at the light hitting stone. Now fill that city with the finest painters alive, the most dangerous bankers in Europe, philosophers who thought they were recovering ancient Greece with their bare hands, and a bureaucratic office whose entire purpose was to arrest men for who they loved. Add marble palaces that glow pink at dusk. Add streets that smell like tanneries and horse dung and the warm bread from the ovens near the Mercato Vecchio. Add the river, low and green in summer, flooding everything in winter without apology. Add the bells. There are always bells in Florence. Dozens of towers ringing at slightly different moments so the sound never quite resolves into silence. Just keeps building on itself, a permanent reminder that God is watching and time is passing and you are still here. That's Florence. In the 1480s, the most sophisticated city in the Western world. Also, quietly, one of the most surveilled. A place where a man could commission a painting that would hang in a church for 500 years and in the same week be anonymously accused of a crime that could ruin his entire family. We're going back there tonight, not as tourists peering at the Duomo, not as art historians tracing the brushstrokes of masters. We're living it. One life, one season, everything you would have seen and smelled and feared and wanted in a city that was producing the Renaissance with one hand and trying to police desire with the other. So, I make these history stories. Honestly, at this point I've got no idea if anyone actually sleeps to them, or if you're all just very niche people who like hearing about the hidden machinery underneath beautiful things. Either way, get comfortable. Subscribe if you want. Here we go. Your eyes open before the bells. This happens sometimes. Your body has learned the rhythm of the city better than you knew it would. Some part of you wakes in the last darkness before dawn, while the air is still cool and the workshop is still quiet, and you haven't yet had to arrange your face into the expression you wear during the day. The expression that doesn't give anything away. You're lying on a straw pallet on the second floor of the workshop, above the storage rooms, below the sleeping quarters of Maestro Benedetto and his wife. There are 4 of you up here. 4 apprentices on 4 pallets with their 4 sets of dreams, in a room that smells like the underside of the work you do all day. The smell is the first thing, always. Linseed oil, which has soaked into every surface of this building over decades so that it lives in the walls themselves, not just the brushes and the grinding stones. Beneath that, lead white, which has its own particular sweetness, almost metallic, the smell of something that is quietly killing the men who grind it every day, even though nobody talks about this. Chalk dust, walnut oil, which Maestro prefers for certain colours, the faintest ghost of egg yolk from yesterday's tempera work, gone slightly sour in the warm air, and underneath all of it, human sleep. 4 young men in a room with one high window that doesn't open fully. The warm, close, animal smell of people who have been working with their hands all day and have not washed, including you. Welcome to Florence. The year is 1483. You've been here for 2 years, 8 months, and approximately 11 days. Not that you're counting. You are Marco di Ser Giacomo Berlinghieri, if we're being formal, which people rarely are with apprentices, 20 years old, from Prato, which is close enough to Florence that you knew what you were getting into when you came, and far enough away that Florence still catches you sometimes, still shows you something you weren't expecting, still hits you between the ribs on an ordinary afternoon for no apparent reason. You came here with a letter of introduction from a notary in Prato, who knew Maestro Benedetto distantly, and the clothes on your back, and hands that had already learned the basic grip of a brush from the brief, mostly frustrating lessons of a local painter who'd told your father you showed promise and then run out of things to teach you within a year. The letter was enough. The hands were enough. Maestro looked at the few small panels you brought with you, turned them in his large red hands, asked you 2 questions about pigment mixing, and told you to start the following Monday. That was 2 years, 8 months, and 11 days ago. Now lie still for a moment and listen to the workshop wake up around you. Not the other apprentices. They're still sleeping or pretending to be. Gianni, 17, from somewhere in the Mugello, who cries in his sleep sometimes and denies it in the morning. Salvo, 23, who's been here long enough to know everything and is waiting to be made a journeyman, which is taking longer than he expected, and has made him sharper edged than he used to be. And Luca. Don't think about Luca yet. Think about the city instead. The city is already awake. You can hear it through the single high window. The first carts on the stone streets, the sound enormous in the pre-dawn quiet, wheels grinding on cobbles as someone brings goods in from outside the walls. A dog barking somewhere in the direction of the Arno. Voices too early and too cheerful. Men starting their working day before the sun has decided what it wants to do this morning. Then, as if the city had been waiting for permission, the first bell. Not close. Maybe San Lorenzo. The sound drops into the quiet like a stone into water, and then the ring spread because one bell means all the bells, and within 30 seconds Florence is ringing from every direction at once, the sounds overlapping and interfering with each other the way they always do, so that you can never quite count the hour by any one bell. You have to triangulate, average them out, guess from the collective noise what time it probably is. It's probably 5 in the morning. Maybe a little before, you need to get up. Not because anyone is demanding it. Maestro Benedetto doesn't appear before 7, and even then he moves slowly through the workshop for the first half hour, assessing the work from the previous day before saying anything to anyone, which is worse, in some ways, than being immediately shouted at. The waiting is its own particular pressure, but the rule in any workshop is that apprentices are up before the master, and the fire is going, and the water is fetched, and if there is pigment to grind before the day's real work starts, you have already been at it for an hour by the time the man you work for comes downstairs. You sit up. The pallet rustles under you. The air in the room is cool and slightly damp. The Florence morning doing its thing where it tricks you into thinking it might be a pleasant day, before the heat descends around 9. Your blanket, thin wool, goes back in the pile. Your feet find the floor, wood, ancient, smooth from decades of the same feet finding the same floor, the surface worn to the texture of old soap. You don't look at Luca's palette. You stand, dress in the dark, partly from habit, and partly because you can. You've done this enough times that your hands know where everything is. The rough linen shirt first, slightly stiff because you've been sweating in it for 3 days and it dries in the shape of you. The hose, dark brown, mended at the left knee with slightly lighter thread that you can feel with your fingertip, even if you can't see it. The short doublet, a faded blue-grey that Maestro would say is the colour of underpainting. Your shoes are near the door where you always leave them. Pointed leather that was relatively new when you arrived, and is now so shaped to your feet that wearing anyone else's shoes would feel like a translation error. The stairs down to the ground floor are steep and tight, and you take them sideways the way you always do, your left hand trailing the plaster wall for balance. The plaster is cool, rough, In 2 places it's crumbled and been patched with something that doesn't quite match, leaving ridges you've memorised without meaning to. The workshop in the morning is a different place than the workshop during the day. During the day it's noise and movement and a maestro's voice and the smell of work intensifying as the hours pass. Now it's just shapes. The long tables where the grinding happens, the stone slabs slightly paler than the wood around them, the shelves along one wall with their ranked jars and bottles and the little ceramic cups that hold the expensive pigments. Ultramarine, which costs more than your yearly wage, kept in a locked box that Maestro opens himself. Vermilion, verdigris, which has the green-blue quality of jealousy. Lead white in its toxic, beautiful quantity. The brushes hanging from their pegs in rows, sorted by size, the finest ones at the top because Maestro says they should be treated like instruments, not tools. The panel Maestro is working on is turned face to the wall for the night. He does this with all his work in progress. Doesn't want it watched while it sleeps, he says, which you used to think was strange and now understand completely. The fire is your first job. Someone has always let it die down to coals overnight, which is sensible because burning the workshop down is the kind of thing that happens to workshops, and Florence has seen enough of that. You coax it back with a poker, add 2 small pieces of olive wood from the box near the hearth, blow into the coals with the bellows until they glow and catch. The heat rolls out at your face. The smell of wood smoke adds itself to everything else. Then water. The well is at the back of the house, through the small courtyard where Maestro's wife grows herbs in clay pots, and the cat sleeps in a patch of warmth that appears reliably at noon. The well handle is cold iron, the chain wet with condensation. The bucket comes up heavy and slightly off plumb, the way it always does, and you carry it back inside, sloshing only a little. You pour some into the basin near the fire, splash your face. The water is cold enough to make you catch your breath, cold enough that you feel it down to the back of your throat somehow, that particular shock of morning cold water. You press your wet hands to your eyes for a moment, hold them there. The darkness behind your palms is complete and somehow restful. A 5-second pause before the day requires anything. Then you take your hands away and the workshop is there again. And last night is there again. Right. There was a note. It had been folded and pushed under the workshop door sometime after dark. You don't know when. Yanni found it when he went to get water late in the evening before bed and brought it to you because your name was on the outside. Not your full name, just Marco, written in a hand that you recognised, which is why your stomach had gone somewhere complicated when you read it. The note said, tomorrow, the usual place. Nothing else. Because nothing else was needed. You had burned it immediately. Held it to the fire and watched it curl and blacken and become ash. Then you'd stirred the ash with the poker until it was nothing, and you'd lain on your pallet in the dark for 2 hours before sleep came for you, going over the calculation you've been going over for 8 months now. The un where on one side you have everything you want and on the other side you have everything you could lose. The calculation never resolves. You do it anyway. Here is the thing about Florence in 1483, that they don't tell you when they're selling you on the city. The thing that lives underneath the marble and the philosophy and the extraordinary beauty of the light at 4 in the afternoon, when it hits the Arno just right, and turns the water to something that doesn't look real. Florence has an office. It is called, in the quiet official Latin of bureaucracy, the Ufficiali di Notte e Conservatori dei Monasteri, the officers of the night and conservators of monasteries, which is one of the more Baroque names for a thing whose actual function you can describe more simply. They look for men who love men. That's it. That's the job. They have a staff. They have a salary. They have an office near the Palazzo della Signoria, and their entire purpose is to find and prosecute sodomites. This word sodomy covers anything from what you might gently call intimate contact between men all the way down to things much less explicit, and the interpretation is expansive, and the city takes it seriously in a way that coexists without apparent discomfort with the fact that half of the men in the workshops and academies and merchant houses of Florence are involved in exactly what the officers spend their days trying to find. This is the contradiction that sits at the centre of Florence like a stone in a shoe. The city that is producing the most sophisticated art in the world, art that circulates images of beautiful male bodies, because that is what the classical tradition looks like. The city where Neoplatonist philosophers talk about the love of beauty as a path toward the divine, and sometimes the love they mean is not entirely metaphorical. The city where Lorenzo de' Medici himself moves through circles, where certain things are understood without being said. This city also has an anonymous denunciation system that has, since the office was founded 50 years ago, implicated tens of thousands of men. They are boxes. Tamburi, they're called, drums. Wooden boxes mounted on the walls of certain churches and public buildings, with a slot at the top like a small door for terrible news. Any citizen can write an accusation on a piece of paper, fold it, drop it in the slot, and walk away. The accusation can be anonymous. The accused man will be investigated. If the evidence is sufficient, he will be brought before the officers. If convicted, the penalties range from fines to imprisonment to, for repeat offenders or men who refuse to cooperate, things considerably worse. A first offence, if you're young and cooperative and from a good family, usually means a fine, sometimes humiliation in the form of a public shaming. Sometimes it goes no further than that. Sometimes it goes much further, and the system works, not because Florence is full of pious informants outraged by sin, but because it's full of people with grievances, business disputes, family feuds, competitive craftsmen, jealous lovers, men who want something from you and have found this particular lever. You write a name on a piece of paper and drop it in the slot, and whatever happens next, the man you named will spend months or years under a shadow. You understand this the way you understand the load-bearing walls in a building. You don't always think about it consciously, but you don't lean on it either. And yet, the note under the door, tomorrow, the usual place. In your chest, something does what it always does when you think about Lucca. You turn back to the grinding stone. There is azurite to prepare. There is always something to grind. You start before the others wake up. The motion of grinding pigment is meditative once you know what you're doing, and you've known what you're doing for long enough that your hands do it without much instruction from your brain. The flat stone, larger than a dinner plate, slightly hollowed in the centre from years of use before you got here. The muller, a rounded pestle of the same stone, slightly smaller. The azurite is a deep blue-green mineral, crystalline before it's ground, and your job is to crush it to a powder fine enough to go into the binding medium without leaving grit that will show up under a brush. You put a small pile of the raw mineral in the centre of the stone. You add a few drops of water. You pick up the muller, which is cold and smooth and heavy in your hand. The weight of it something you now find reassuring, and you begin. The motion is circular, rhythmic, starting from the hips the way Maestro showed you. You lean into it slightly. The mineral crunches at first, a sound like boots on gravel, and then as it breaks down the sound changes, becomes finer, less percussive, until it's more of a whisper, a sustained hiss. The colour intensifies as the particles get smaller. Azurite goes from greenish blue to something richer, deeper, truer. It becomes itself more fully when it's ground fine. You've thought about this before. Your shoulders work. The muscles that run from the base of your neck across the top of your back, the ones that are always slightly stiff in the morning, warm up and loosen. There's a blister on your right palm, half healed, that pulls when you grip the muller. You adjust. You continue. The light through the small high windows begins to shift, from nothing to a grey suggestion of something, to a pale blue that means dawn has committed. The colours of the workshop become real slowly, the familiar objects assembling themselves from shadow into their daytime identities. Behind you, someone on the stairs. You know who it is by the sound. Gianni's tread is light and apologetic, like he's not sure he has the right to be on the stairs. Salvo comes down heavily, always slightly irritated before noon. Maestro's step you would recognise in any building in any city in Europe. That particular heaviness and rhythm, one foot slightly favouring the left side where he fell from a scaffold 12 years ago, and the bone didn't set quite right. This step is Luca's. Luca walks quietly but not carefully. There's a difference. Careful walking sounds like someone trying not to be heard. Quiet walking just sounds like someone whose feet fit easily on the ground. Light and sure, the way a man walks when he knows where he is. You don't turn around. You keep grinding. The azurite hisses under the muller. The light is getting better now. You're early, Luca says. His voice in the morning has a particular quality. Lower than usual, still carrying the texture of sleep, slightly rough at the edges. You have spent an embarrassing amount of time thinking about Luca's voice in the morning, cataloguing its specific qualities, the way it sits in a room. Someone has to be, you say. This is a normal exchange. It means nothing. This is how you talk in the workshop in front of Gianni and Salvo, in front of Maestro when he comes down and the day officially begins. Light, brief, unremarkable. The conversations of two apprentices who have worked in the same space for long enough to have developed the comfortable shorthand of people who know each other well. You hear him cross to the water basin, the sound of him washing his face, the small, sharp inhalation of cold water, the drip of it falling back, the rustle of him finding a cloth drying his hands, then quiet. Then, I saw you get it, last night, the note. You don't stop grinding. I burned it, you say. I know, I saw that too. The muller goes around, the sound of azurite becoming itself. In your peripheral vision, Luca is leaning against the wall beside the shelves, arms crossed. He's looking at the work in progress on the table, or appears to be. In this room, with its long familiarity and its constant low-grade danger, you've both become good at appearing to look at things you're not looking at. You shouldn't send notes, you say. Your voice is level. This is something you've practiced. You needed to know. I needed to not have your handwriting under a door anyone could have found. A silence, not an uncomfortable one. You've had enough of these silences that you know the texture of them. Can tell a thinking silence from an angry one from the particular kind that means Luca is about to say something and is choosing the words. The usual place, Luca says, after midday, if you want. If you want. You have never been able to explain to yourself or to anyone how he does this. The thing where the simplest sentence from him lands differently than the same sentence from anyone else. It's not only that he's beautiful, though he is, in the specific way of a young man who knows he's being looked at, and has decided this is something to work with rather than against. It's something under the beauty, some quality of attention. When Luca looks at you, it feels like being seen at a resolution most people can't access. You hate this about him. You're completely devoted to this about him. After midday, you say, if there's time, which is yes. By the time the others come down and Maestro arrives with his particular heavy step and his assessment of yesterday's work, the two of you are at your separate stations. The morning has arranged itself into the shape of an ordinary day in a Florentine painter's workshop. Pigments being prepared, panels being gessoed. The younger apprentice, Gianni, practicing a hand gesture over and over because Maestro told him yesterday his handling of the female figures looked like they were all trying to stop a cart. Nobody sees anything. This is a skill you have both been developing for 8 months. The skill of being in the same room and being strangers in it. And you have gotten good at it, the way you get good at anything you practice every day. But you are aware of where he is in the room at all times. Let me tell you about Florence. Not the Florence of the paintings, though that Florence is also real and is everywhere around you, in the workshop and on the streets, and inside the churches that contain the particular accumulated richness of a city that has been paying for beauty for 100 years. Not the Florence of Lorenzo de' Medici and his poets and philosophers, though that Florence is also real, and it touches your life more directly than you might think. The Florence I want to tell you about is the physical city, the actual stone and mud and smell of it, the thing your body moves through every day. Florence sits in a bowl between low hills. The Arno cuts through the middle of it east to west, shallow in summer, dangerous in flood season, always slightly green, always slightly smelling of the upstream tanneries and wool works that have been using it as both water source and drain for longer than anyone can remember. The city is not enormous by the standards of the time, maybe 50,000 people. Paris is bigger, Venice is bigger, but Florence is dense in a way that multiplies everything. The buildings press close. The streets are narrow, many of them barely wide enough for 2 men to pass without turning sideways. The piazzas are therefore shocks of space, openings in the fabric of the city that hit you differently depending on the time of day and the quality of the light. You came from Prato, which is to say you did not come from nothing. Prato is a proper city, an old city, wool trade, textile wealth, a cathedral with a famous Donatello pulpit, and a fresco cycle by Filippo Lippi, who, in one of history's better rumours, eventually ran off with the nun who had been sitting for the Virgin Mary. So you understood city life before Florence. You understood narrow streets and market days and the social algebra of a place where everyone knows your family. But Florence is more. Florence is always more. The first time you walked across the Ponte Vecchio, you stopped in the middle of it and the current of people split around you, and you stood there for what felt like a long time just looking. The shops that line both sides of the bridge, butchers and tanners and goldsmiths all mixed together, the goods hanging out over the water, the smell of meat and leather and metal and the river underneath all of it, and above everything the sound of Florence going about its business, and you felt something shift in you. Something that had been braced for the city relaxed into it. This was the place. This was where things were made. You still feel that sometimes, even now, after 2 years and 8 months, even on ordinary mornings. This morning Maestro sets you to a task that involves going out. He does this sometimes, sends one apprentice out with a specific errand, and the selection is not arbitrary. You have noticed over the months that he sends you when the errand requires a certain kind of judgment. It's the closest he comes to a compliment. Today, a jar of gum arabic needs replenishing. The apothecary where Maestro buys his dry goods is near the Mercato Vecchio. You know the route. You know the apothecary, a small dark man with spectacular eyebrows and the habit of adding a small extra thing to orders for customers he likes, a dried flower or a twist of paper with something unusual in it. Last month it was a tiny amount of genuine Indian yellow that he'd had too little of to sell properly and wanted to pass along to someone who would understand it. Maestro hands you the coin. You take the jar from the shelf, tuck it under your arm. Standard procedure. At the door, you don't look at Luca. He doesn't look at you. You step out into Florence. The street hits you immediately, the way the street always does when you come out from the enclosed smell of the workshop into whatever the city has accumulated overnight. The Via dei Servi, which is not the grandest street in Florence, but is a good street, stone paved and reasonably wide by Florentine standards, meaning 2 carts can pass with some negotiation, is already fully awake. The smells come in layers, and this is actually one of the things you love about this city. The way you've learned to read the smell of the streets, the way Maestro reads a drawing. The top note today is bread. There's a bakery 2 buildings down whose ovens have been going since before you were awake, and the smell of fresh bread in Florence in the morning is one of those things that seems too good to be real, but is consistently, daily real. Beneath that, horses. There are always horses. You can tell how wealthy a street is by the concentration of horse dung, which sounds like a perverse measure but is accurate, because horses are expensive and only people with money have them or business with them. So the dung is both pollution and prosperity indicator simultaneously. Beneath the horses, the general human substrate of a medieval city. People who do not bathe daily, open gutters carrying yesterday's household water and more specific wastes toward the Arno. The particular warm, sour smell of large numbers of people living close together that you stopped noticing within 3 months of arriving and now only notice when you return from somewhere quieter. And underneath it all, just detectable, the green mineral smell of the river. Florence always smells of the Arno if you know how to find it. You start walking. The thing about Florence at street level is the constant negotiation, not hostile, generally not hostile. Florentines are not a gentle people in the way that words sometimes mean soft or yielding. They are direct, opinionated, quick to take offence, and quicker to forget the offence once it's been resolved. But the street negotiation is physical, constant, and requires your full attention. A man with a handcart of cabbages wants the centre of the street. 2 women with baskets are taking up the right side. A boy is chasing a chicken with the focused determination of someone whose family depends on catching that chicken. An old man has stopped for reasons known only to himself near the junction with a smaller street and is creating a 4-person traffic problem. You navigate. Left around the cart, right to avoid the women, a quick step over the gutter that cuts across the street at an angle, and you're through the worst of it and moving more freely. The city changes block by block. This is something you've learned. 5 minutes walk from the workshop puts you in a different social zone, different smell, different texture of noise. The apothecary district near the Mercato is richer in smell than almost anywhere in the city. Herbs and spices and medicinal preparations all competing in the air outside the shops. The sharp green of rosemary, the sweetness of dried lavender, something that might be cumin or coriander, or the first notes of something more exotic, a whiff of pepper or ginger from a merchant's back room. But first you pass through the neighbourhood that sits between the workshop and the market, and this neighbourhood is the neighbourhood of weavers and dyers, and it has its own particular smell and sound. The sound is the looms. You hear them half a street away, the rhythmic clatter and thud of the apparatus, the sound of cloth being made. Florence's wealth is built on this, has been for 200 years. The wool trade, the silk trade, the finished cloth that goes to every court in Europe and comes back as gold that builds palaces and funds painters and allows a city to become a republic that becomes an experiment in self-governance, that becomes an argument about what human beings are capable of when they have enough resources to think carefully about it. All of that, the Medici and the philosophy and the art and the republic, is downstream from this sound. The clatter of looms. The dyer's section smells like something from the deep past. Mordants made from things you'd rather not think about. Weld for yellow, wode for blue, or indigo if the merchant can afford the import. Kermes for red. Expensive. The crushed bodies of small insects imported from the Levant. The colour they produce being so dense and true that it appears in the mantles of Madonnas everywhere. The dye vats are huge, heated from below, and the men who work them stand over the fumes in a warm toxic cloud all day, their arms stained to the elbow in colours that won't wash off, their hands rough and cracked and permanently dyed. A woman is hanging finished cloth from a line strung between two buildings above street level, the fabric damp and heavy, swinging slightly in the morning air, brilliant scarlet. You stop for a second just to look at it against the blue sky. This is something Florence does to you. It ambushes you with beauty in the middle of ordinary streets. You keep moving. Near the Mercato Vecchio, the street opens out and the noise doubles. The market is old, older than everything else around it except the streets themselves. It occupies a piazza of reasonable size by Florentine standards, though Florence has seen larger, and on market mornings it fills itself past capacity with vendors and customers and people who have no intention of buying anything, but find themselves stopping anyway. The stalls spread beyond the piazza proper into the surrounding streets. Vegetables from the farms outside the walls, bread, meat hanging from hooks, fish that arrive before dawn from the coast on pack horses whose average speed you don't want to calculate given the distance and the smell. Cloth merchants, tool merchants, a man selling religious objects, small painted panels and carved wooden things and wax votives in the shapes of various body parts, limbs and hearts and eyes, the currency of prayers of gratitude or desperate petition. You thread through it. You know where the apothecary is. The shop is on a side street off the market, between a shop that sells candles and one that sells inexplicably only ropes. The door is low, the interior dark, the smell immediately overwhelming in the best way. Dried things hanging from the ceiling, bundles and clusters of plants and flowers, jars along every wall in ranked order by some taxonomy that makes sense to the apothecary but requires explanation to anyone else. Powders, liquids, dried and fresh and preserved. The smell is simultaneously medicinal, culinary, and somehow sacred, as if everything in here has multiple uses and the shop is a kind of universal pharmacy for the body and the spirit. The apothecary, whose name is Ser Aldo, but who's known in the neighbourhood as Il Sopracciglio because of the eyebrows, emerges from the back at the sound of your step on his threshold. His assistant, a boy of 14, trails after him with a jar he's been cleaning. "The painter's boy," Ser Aldo says, not unkindly. "This is what you are in this shop." Gum Arabic? "Please, £1/2." He goes to his shelves without checking anything. These quantities live in his memory completely. The weighing is precise, the small brass weights going on the scale, with the delicate authority of a man who has done this 10,000 times, and finds the number itself satisfying each time it balances. "The maestro's work is going well?" he asks, not particularly expecting an answer. "The Tornabuoni commission, you say? It's moving." Ser Aldo makes a sound that suggests he understands the pace of these things. He wraps the gum arabic in paper, the paper in a square of leather, ties it with a thin cord. He hands it over and takes the coin Maestro gave you with the same deft motion. He looks at the coin briefly, assessing it with the reflex of someone who has accepted counterfeit once in his life and never forgiven himself for it. Then, the small addition. He reaches behind the counter and produces a tiny paper packet, smaller than your thumb. He holds it out. "Saffron," he says. "Not enough to sell, too good to throw away. The maestro will know what to do with it. You take it. Saffron is gold, or close enough. You hold the packet carefully." "Thank you, Ser Aldo." "Tell him il Sopracciglio sends his regards." You step back out into the street. The market noise returns. You have the gum arabic. You have the saffron. You have the morning around you and a couple of hours before you need to be back at the workshop. Maestro said to take your time, which is as close as he comes to saying that the morning is yours if you want it. You do want it. You walk toward the river. Here is something about Florence that you need to understand, or rather something about Florence in 1483, which is not quite the same city that the history books describe when they talk about the Renaissance. The version of Florence that becomes famous in retrospect, the city of Leonardo and Botticelli, and Lorenzo the Magnificent and the Platonic Academy. That city is happening. It's real. You can see it. Lorenzo is alive, 40 miles from where you're standing in his various palaces and villas. Botticelli, who is 38 this year, has his workshop in the city. Leonardo left Florence 2 years ago for Milan, which is a loss the city feels, though people are still arguing about whether he's a painter or an engineer or something with no existing name. But the version you live in is also a city of fear, in ways that coexist uneasily with all that beauty. The Pazzi conspiracy was 5 years ago. The year you turned 15 in Prato, the news came of what had happened in the Duomo in Florence. The Pazzi family, rivals of the Medici, had arranged for assassins to strike during High Mass. The assassins waited until the consecration, the moment of transubstantiation, when every person in the cathedral had their head bowed, and then they moved. Lorenzo de' Medici was stabbed and escaped with a wound in the neck. His brother Giuliano was stabbed 19 times and died on the floor of the cathedral. What happened after? The Medici response was swift and total. The Pazzi conspirators and their allies were hunted through the city. 80 executions in a period of months. The bodies of the condemned hung from the windows of the Palazzo della Signoria. Botticelli painted their likenesses on the walls of the palazzo, a painting of condemnation in lieu of, or in addition to, the actual bodies. The city saw what power looked like when it was threatened and survived. Florence has been quieter since then, not dead, not afraid in the way of a city under occupation, but marked by the knowledge that the Medici's tolerance of the Republic's forms is a generosity that can be withdrawn. That beauty and terror are neighbours here. You think about this sometimes. The way the beautiful and the dangerous sit next to each other in this city like two people at a dinner who pretend not to know each other. You're thinking about it now, as you turn a corner and the Duomo comes into view. It comes into view from the south, at an angle, and the first thing you see is the dome, Brunelleschi's dome, which is not a thing you ever feel you can adequately describe to yourself despite having looked at it so many times that you'd think the description would be automatic. The dome sits above the cathedral, the way nothing else sits above any building you've ever seen. Not balanced on top of the structure so much as grown from it, as if the stone had been made to do this by someone who understood stone as a living material. It is the largest dome in the world. When Brunelleschi was commissioned to build it, in 1418, 60 years before you were born, the cathedral had been sitting for over a century with a hole in the roof where the dome was supposed to go, because nobody could figure out how to build it. The dome the original designers had imagined was too large for the techniques anyone knew, so the cathedral waited. The people of Florence walked past it for 100 years with this enormous planned absence at the top, and then Brunelleschi, who was a goldsmith and clockmaker, and something like a physicist before physics had a name, looked at the hole and said he could do it. And he did. He built a double-shell dome, the inner shell supporting the outer one through a geometry that he invented as he went, refusing to tell his workers the full plan in advance because he was afraid they'd steal it, building the scaffolding in the dome itself rather than from the ground because the dome was too large for any ground scaffolding, working the stone with machines he designed himself. The men who worked on it were still alive when you were a child. Not many, but some. That recent. That real. The dome rises above you now as you walk into the piazza, and you stop in the middle of the open space and you look at it the way you still look at it, the way you've looked at it 100 times and still find you need to do. The brick herringbone pattern of the dome's surface catches the morning light differently at different points. The lantern at the top, gold against the blue sky. The marble cladding of the cathedral below, green and white and pink in the Florentine Gothic style that always looks almost too rich, too deliberate in its colour scheme, like a building that's wearing jewellery. The piazza is busy. Pilgrims. Citizens, a group of men who look like they're arguing about something that is either theology or money, which in Florence often amounts to the same thing. Children running in the space with the abandonment of children in a place with no carts, in the outer octagonal wall of the baptistry, which stands across from the cathedral at a respectful distance that makes it possible to see both. There is a tamburo, a denunciation box. It's mounted at shoulder height, built into the wall, the slot at the top worn smooth from use. It doesn't look like what it is. It looks like a postal box or a donation slot. Just a small wooden panel in the old stone, almost decorative. You've walked past it dozens of times. Every time you feel it without looking at it. The way you feel a hot surface near your skin before you touch it. The city of Florence, between 1432, when the officers of the Knight were formally established, and 1502, when the office was finally closed, will implicate approximately 17,000 men. 17,000 in a city of 50,000 people. That number, when you first heard it, seemed wrong. Seemed like an exaggeration that the past sometimes offers to make a point. But then you do the arithmetic. The office runs for 70 years. That's roughly 250 men a year, 5 a week, less than 1 a day, in a city of 50,000. Of those 17,000, not all were convicted. The system allowed for accusation to die quietly if evidence was thin. Many accusations were clearly malicious, and the officers, who were not fools, knew the difference between genuine denunciation and someone using the system to harm a business rival. Many cases resulted in fines rather than imprisonment. Many young men, especially those under 30, received more lenient treatment because the city had a somewhat official theory that younger men were victims of older ones, which was convenient for everyone involved in the pretense, but some did not receive leniency. and the shadow of the possible accusation lay over every man who understood himself to be the kind of man the officers were looking for. You are that kind of man. You have known this about yourself since before Florence, since before Prato even, since you were 14, and understood that the word for what you were was a word people said as a curse and meant it. You know that the word and the reality of you are not the same thing. You know that what you have with Luca is not a word in any vocabulary the officers of the night use, but you also know that the gap between what you know and what they'd call it is not something you can successfully argue to a magistrate. So you are careful. You have been careful. You're careful in a way that has become so thorough, it's not effort anymore. It's just how you exist in the city. The careful people are sometimes invisible. That's the point. You turn away from the tamburo and keep walking. The usual place. Let me tell you about the usual place. There are spaces in Florence that exist between the public and the private. Places where the city's density creates accidental privacy. Not hiding places exactly. Not secret rooms. Just spots where the flow of people goes differently, where a courtyard opens off a busy street, and the sound drops by half, and the light is softer, and people who pass the entrance rarely come in unless they have reason to. The usual place is a small courtyard behind a church near the Ponte alle Grazie. The church is not one of the famous ones. It has a wooden door that's almost always open, a single small chapel inside, a Madonna of the type you've seen 600 of, competent but not exceptional. The courtyard behind it was probably a garden at some point. There's a well, unused, the rope gone. A stone bench that's been there long enough to have a weathered hollow in the seat. A wall with a fig tree growing against it, old enough that the branches have been trained along the stone and now form a kind of loose canopy. You found it in your first winter here, during a cold afternoon when you wanted to be outside, but the main streets felt too much. You found it alone, and then, months later, you mentioned it to Luca, and that mention was itself a kind of threshold. The first time you went there together, you sat on the bench and talked for 2 hours about painting, about what Maestro was trying to do with the Tornabuoni commission and whether it was working, about what you'd seen at the workshop of another painter, whose apprentice was Luca's distant cousin, and sometimes shared what he saw, about a drawing you'd been working on in private just for yourself that you'd shown nobody. That time, it was just talking, which was also something. The second time was different. You don't think about the second time in the workshop. You've learned not to. The thinking is for other places. You make your way back toward the river, the gum arabic and the saffron in your hands, your feet knowing the route. The morning has gotten warm the way Florence mornings do in late summer, the heat arriving suddenly as if someone has turned something on. The stone of the street starts to radiate. The shadows under the overhanging upper floors of buildings become genuinely desirable. You shift from sun to shade automatically, the small navigation of a city person in August. Midday is still hours away. Back at the workshop, the morning passes in the way workshops pass. Slowly, and then not at all. You deliver the gum arabic to Maestro, who examines it, nods, places it on the correct shelf without ceremony. The saffron he holds for a moment in his palm, looks at with the expression he uses when he's thinking about colour, then places it separately with the deliberateness that means it will go into something important. Your task for the morning is finishing work on a panel that needs its final gold highlights. Gold leaf is Salvo's specialty, technically, but Maestro has been teaching you the burnishing, which is the last stage, the moment when the gold is activated. You work with the burnishing stone, smooth agate in your right hand, leaning close to the panel with the concentration that this work requires. The gold leaf, impossibly thin, lies on the red bowl layer beneath it, and the burnishing compresses it and makes it shine. You can feel the resistance change as you work, the stone's pressure engaging the metal at a depth that has its own sensation, firm and smooth and satisfying when it's going right. Gianni passes behind you twice, the second time pausing long enough that you can feel his attention on the work. That's better than yesterday, he says. The bowl was ready yesterday. The gold wasn't going on right. How can you tell? Feel how the stone catches. When the base isn't properly set, the stone drags instead of gliding. You move the burnisher in a short arc and feel the difference yourself. Hear, feel. You hand him the stone. Gianni is too young to know that he's learning. He takes it with the solemn attention of a boy trying to demonstrate that he's taking things seriously, which is its own kind of learning. From across the room, Luca is watching. Not you, the panel, but that's the same thing. Salvo emerges from the back room with prepared ground for the new panel that will start next week. He sets it on the table, checks the surface with one finger, makes a sound indicating acceptable quality, and returns to his work. Salvo has the competence of a man who will be a very good craftsman, and the ambition of a man who wants to be something more than that, and the tension between those two things has given him a permanent slight edge. You like him. You're slightly afraid of him, in the way you're slightly afraid of any very competent person whose judgment you haven't entirely mapped. The morning passes, bells mark it, the heat builds. Maestro, at some point before noon, announces that he's going to visit the client. He says this with the resigned air of a man going to confront something complicated, which is accurate, because clients are complicated and the Tornabuoni family are complicated even by the standards of Florentine patron complexity. He puts on the good coat. He picks up the drawing portfolio that he takes to client meetings. He says to Salvo that the second layer on the left panel should dry before anything else is done today. He says to Gianni that the hand gestures are better, but the left thumb still looks like a dog's leg. He says to you, "Good work on the gold." Then he leaves. The workshop without Maestro is a slightly different place, not lax. The work continues, the rhythms don't change dramatically. But there's a loosening. Gianni starts humming something under his breath. Salvo says something mildly crude about the client that he would not have said if Maestro were present. Luca catches your eye across the room, just for a moment. The way you've both learned to do it, brief enough that it doesn't register as anything to anyone watching, long enough to say what it says, after midday. You look back at the gold, the hunger of this, the particular specific hunger of it, is something you've spent months trying to understand because understanding it seems important, seems like the kind of information that would be useful to have. Not just the hunger for him, specifically, the particular pull of that face and that voice and the way he moves in the space he occupies, though that too, obviously that too. But the hunger of the thing itself, the thing of being known, of having someone who understands what you are. Florence has given you a vocabulary for this, actually. One of the strange gifts of this city. In the Medici circle, there is a man named Marsilio Ficino, who is 50 years old this year, and who may be the most relentlessly intellectual human being you've ever heard described. He runs the Platonic Academy, which is not quite an institution and not quite just a group of friends, something in between, a loose gathering of scholars and artists and wealthy patrons who meet at Lorenzo's various properties to discuss Plato and Neoplatonism and what exactly the ancient philosophers meant and whether it applies to Christian theology and 100 other things. Ficino translated Plato into Latin, the complete works. He also wrote his own work, a book called Theologia Platonica, that attempts to reconcile classical philosophy with Christianity. And in the course of doing this, he spent a great deal of time on one particular Platonic concept. The idea, which comes from the Symposium and the Phaedrus, that love between men can be a path toward the divine, that the appreciation of beauty in another person is a form of philosophical assent, that eros, properly understood, is not about the body but about the soul's recognition of the divine quality in another soul. Ficino called this amor Socraticus, Socratic love. He also called it amor Platonicus, which is where we get the phrase Platonic love, though it didn't originally mean what it means now. The idea is not entirely the innocent thing it sounds like. Ficino knew exactly what Plato was actually describing in the Symposium. He wasn't naive. But he also found in Platonism a vocabulary and a tradition and a set of precedents that allowed certain things to be discussed in a register that was not criminal. Love between men, when framed as philosophical, as spiritual, as an ascent toward the good and the beautiful, could be talked about in educated circles with a kind of tolerance that the same feelings framed as what the officers of the night called them could never have accessed. You know about this. You've heard it discussed. Luca knows about it. Luca, who has more education than you and a cousin who moves in Medici-adjacent circles, explained it to you once at the usual place, sitting on the stone bench in the late afternoon light, with a careful neutrality that was itself a form of communication. Ficino says the beautiful body is a sign pointing toward divine beauty, Luca said. The soul that recognizes beauty in another is responding to something real, to the presence of the divine in the physical world. You had thought about this for a moment. That's very convenient, you said. And Luca had looked at you with an expression that was either exasperation or amusement, possibly both, and said, "Yes, that's rather the point." It is convenient. It is also, as far as you can tell, genuinely what Ficino believes. There is no cynicism in the philosophy, or rather, whatever cynicism exists is not Ficino's. The cynicism belongs to the city, which has created both the Platonic Academy and the Office of the Knight, and seems to consider this reasonable. You've thought about this a lot, about the gap between what the philosophers say and what the officers do, about how a city can hold both things at once, can be simultaneously producing one of the most sophisticated defences of male love as spiritual practice in the history of Western thought, and arresting men for acting on it. The answer, you've concluded, is that the city contains more than one version of itself. That what's permitted to the educated and the wealthy and the connected is different from what's permitted to others. That Ficino and Lorenzo can have their philosophical conversations in comfortable villas, while men of lesser standing get dropped into the system by anonymous letters. This is not a comfortable conclusion, but it is probably accurate. You finish the gold burnishing. The panel looks right. The gold has the warm depth it needs, not bright and flat, but rich and warm. The burnishing having produced the particular effect that makes gold in medieval and Renaissance painting different from anything a photograph ever reproduces, a living quality that changes with the light. Maestro will see it when he comes back. You set down the burnishing stone and look at your hands. The agate has left a faint impression in your right palm. Your fingers are slightly cramped from the fine work, the micro-control of the burnishing motion. You flex them, feel the joints crack softly. Noon. The bells. Salvo announces he's going to eat and will be back in an hour. Gianni is already reaching for the bread, which he's had with him all morning, with the dedicated foresight of a boy who thinks about food constantly. They have the workshop to themselves for a moment, and then Salvo is gone out the door, and Gianni is settled near the window with his bread, and a rapt expression suggesting he's capable of complete mental absence while chewing. Luca is cleaning a brush with the focused attention of someone who's not thinking about the brush. You say nothing. You stand, stretch, pick up your jacket from the peg near the door. Back in an hour, you say, to the room, to nobody specific. Gianni nods without looking up. You go out. The street is at its midday peak. The heat, now fully committed, has driven the shade seekers to the edges of the buildings and filled the sunny centre of the road with people who have no choice or don't care. The smell has shifted with the heat, becoming more concentrated, everything that was faint in the morning now fully present. The bread smell is gone, replaced by cooking from the houses above the ground floor shops, and meat, and something from the dye works down the street that gets worse as the day gets hotter. You walk. You don't walk directly to the usual place. You never do. You walk a route that takes you past the market again, through the street of the tanners, down toward the river and then east along it toward the Ponte alle Grassi. The route takes 15 minutes instead of 5. The extra 10 minutes have been worth what they've cost many times over. The knowledge that you cannot be followed without your noticing. The knowledge that you arrive without a straight line traceable from the workshop door. This is what love looks like when it has to be careful. It looks like a man taking the long way through a city. The Arno is low this time of year. You cross on the Ponte alle Grazie, which is the bridge east of the Ponte Vecchio. Less famous, less crowded, the shops on this bridge smaller and less grand, though the view from the middle, looking west toward the Ponte Vecchio and beyond to the hills on the south bank, is one of the better views the city offers. You lean on the bridge railing for a moment, looking at the river. The Arno in August is a particular thing. The green-brown water is slow, the surface barely moving in the midday stillness. Where the piers of the bridges interrupt the flow, there are small eddies, the water curling back on itself. Along the banks downstream, the laundresses work in the shallow water, beating clothes against the stones, the sound carrying up to you as a distant rhythmic crack. They've been doing this every day of every season you've been in Florence. These women, standing ankle deep in the river with the water cold and the work heavy and the sun now directly on their backs. You've painted water many times. You've never yet painted it correctly. Maestro says this about himself too, which is why you've stopped feeling ashamed about it. The hills south of the city are visible from the bridge in the shimmer of the August heat. The old Trano slopes up from the bank, a city that is almost its own city, different in character from the north bank, narrower streets, more artisan, more craft. The Pitti Palace is up there, the Palazzo Pitti, built 40 years ago by Luca Pitti, who wanted to outdo the Medici and succeeded in making something enormous and then went bankrupt. The Medici bought it eventually, which was always how that kind of story ended. You push off from the railing and continue to the end of the bridge. The church is 5 minutes east along the south bank. You go through the wooden door, nod at the Madonna, hear the small dry silence of the interior that all these small churches have, and continue through the vestry to the door at the back. The courtyard. The fig tree has been busy all summer. The fruit is ripening now. The figs heavy and dark green on the branches, some of them split at the skin where the heat has been too much for them. The smell of ripening figs is the smell of this place for you now, inseparable from it. Sweet and slightly fermented and alive in a way that is different from the cool stone smell of the church behind you. The stone bench, you sit on it. The hollow in the stone is exactly where it always is, shaped by how many other people over how many years have sat here, though they've never sat here quite the way you have. You lean your back against the wall. The fig branches above you move slightly in the faint air, and wait 4 minutes, maybe 5. Then the wooden door to the vestry opens and Luca comes through. He walks across the courtyard the same way he crosses the workshop, light and sure. He's carrying something, one of the figs from the tree which he must have noticed on his way in. He sits on the bench beside you, close enough that you can feel the warmth of him. He splits the fig with his thumbs. The interior is brilliant red-pink, bright as any pigment. He gives you half. You eat it. The sweetness and the seed texture and the heat of the fruit that's been in the sun all day. You burned the note, he says. I told you I did. I know. A pause. I didn't mean it as an accusation. You look at the split fig in your hand, at the seeds arranged in their pattern, the geometry of the interior. There was an arrest, Luca says, near San Frediano. 2 nights ago, I heard from Piero. Piero is Luca's cousin, the one adjacent to the Medici circle. Piero knows things. Piero is, in your private taxonomy, a useful man and a slightly terrifying one. How bad, you ask? A journeyman, cloth trade, 26. A pause. He's out now. The family paid, but it was... The neighbourhood knows. The neighbourhood knows. Which means the work of a careful, anonymous letter is done, regardless of what the courts decide. The man will carry it. You finish the fig. The sweetness is gone. You set the stem down on the edge of the bench. I've been careful, you say. I know. No note the next time. Whatever you want to say it at the workshop. At the workshop I can't say anything. At the workshop you don't need to say anything. A silence. The fig tree moves. From inside the church, very faintly, you can hear a priest doing something. Maybe the mid-afternoon office. The Latin syllables floating through the stone. I've been thinking, Luca says. You wait. About Ficino, what he says. We've talked about Ficino. I know, but I've been reading more of it. He pauses in the way he pauses before saying something he's spent time on. He says that the love of beauty in another person is a stage on a journey, that you start with the beautiful body and you ascend toward the beautiful soul and from there toward the divine. It's not supposed to stop at the body. Luca, I know what it sounds like. I'm not being naive. I know what Ficino is doing with the philosophy. I know it's convenient. But there's something in it that's... He stops, starts again. He says that the soul recognizes the divine in another soul, that this recognition is the beginning of real love. Not the body, the soul. The officers care about the body. The officers care about what they can prove. They care about testimony and witnesses and physical evidence. They do not care about whether 2 men have read Plato together. You turn to look at him. This close, the details that you've spent 8 months cataloguing are simply present. The particular dark of his eyes, the quality of his stillness when he's focused on something, the line of his jaw, the small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood fall that he's never fully explained. What are you actually saying, you ask? He looks at you. I'm saying that I'm not interested in being afraid forever, he says. I'm saying that I want a life. not a hidden thing, a life. This is the conversation you've been not having for 8 months, the one that exists just outside the boundary of what you've allowed yourself to say, because saying it means acknowledging the gap between what this is and what it can be, and the gap is large enough that you found it easier not to measure it. You look at his face, at the question in it. Florence doesn't offer that life, you say, not to people like us, not officially, not in any way that matters. He looks at the fig tree. A bird has arrived in it, small and brown, indifferent to the two of you. Lorenzo has friends, Luca says carefully, men in his circle, men who, he pauses again, men whose arrangements are known among people who know such things, and nothing happens to them, because they are in the right circle, because they have the right protection. We are not in that circle, you say. We are apprentices in a painter's workshop. Maestro has patrons. Maestro has connections. Maestro is not Lorenzo de' Medici. Luca is quiet. The bird finds a fig and begins working on it with focused efficiency. You know what he's doing. He's not wrong about the thing he's describing. It's true that Lorenzo's Florence operates on different rules for different classes of people. It's true that certain educated men in Medici circles can have conversations and perhaps arrangements that would destroy a wool worker who tried the same. It's true that the philosophy provides a register of discourse that functions as protective colouring for men who can access it. What Luca is proposing, in his roundabout way, is that you try to get closer to that protection, that you use Maestro's position and the patron's connections and the cultural prestige of being artists in a city that prizes art to build a version of your life that is visible without being criminal. It's not impossible. You've thought about it. You've thought about it more than you want to admit. It's also terrifying in a way that you find it difficult to put into precise words, because the terror is not only about the officers of the night, it's about being the kind of man who has staked his life on a particular reading of the situation and found out he was wrong. You've seen what the system does to men who miscalculate. Let me think about it, you say. This is true. It's also the kind of answer that ends this particular branch of the conversation without closing it off. Luca nods. He knows this too. You sit in the courtyard for another half hour. You talk about the Tornabuoni commission and what Maestro is trying to do with the figure arrangement. You talk about a rumour that a very significant commission is coming to Florence that will require the best workshops in the city to collaborate. You talk about a drawing Luca has been doing privately, figures from mythology, the kind of thing that Botticelli has made central to his recent work, the Medici influence turning the workshops toward classical themes. You don't touch each other. In this city, in this courtyard, behind this church, you don't touch each other. The proximity of the conversation is its own thing. Eventually you say you need to get back. He nods. You go first. Out through the vestry, through the church, into the street. The afternoon heat is there, full and serious. You walk back through the city toward the workshop, the long route, and you think about what he said. I want a life, not a hidden thing, a life. You understand this. You understand it so thoroughly that it's almost painful to turn it over and look at it. The desire not to be divided, not to be one person in the workshop and something else only in hidden courtyards. The desire for the thing that is real to be the thing that is permitted. Florence is not a city that makes this easy. Florence is a city that has built monuments to beauty and put anonymous denunciation boxes on the church walls next to them. But Florence is also the city where Ficino is writing about the divinity of love, and Botticelli is putting it in paint, and Lorenzo is hosting conversations where the meaning of male beauty is discussed with something like freedom. The contradiction doesn't resolve. You carry it back through the heat. At the workshop, Maestro has returned from the client visit. He's in the back room with the good coat off and the working coat on, and the particular expression of a man who has just spent 2 hours managing someone else's anxiety about something he's going to produce that is far better than they can yet imagine. He looks at the gold work. He looks at it for a long time without saying anything. Then he turns to something else, which in Maestro's language means the gold work is right. The afternoon passes. More work. The light through the workshop windows changes as the sun moves, the long August afternoon taking its time, the quality of light going gold and then warmer gold, and then the particular amber of late afternoon that Maestro says is the best painting light in the day, and which therefore everybody is usually too tired to use properly. Salvo finishes the second layer on the panel. Gianni practices hands. You move to a new task, the preparation of a support for next week's work, stretching the linen and preparing the gesso, a physical task that requires both hands and the full weight of your body at points. The gesso knife working in long, smooth strokes, the surface needing to be perfect before the ground layer goes on. Luca is close by, working on the same surface on the other side. The work requires you to coordinate without discussing it, trading the tool, compensating for each other's pressure. You've done this before. It has a particular kind of intimacy to it, the kind of intimacy that exists in shared work. At some point in the late afternoon, Gianni says, "There were officers on San Frediano again this morning." Nobody responds immediately. "I heard it from the baker's boy," Gianni says, "when I went for the water." Salvo makes a neutral sound. "They come every few months," Maestro says, from the corner where he's been mixing something. His voice is even, informational. "They're looking for the brothels that have been setting up near the bridge. Nothing to do with us." This is possibly true. It is also possibly what Maestro says to prevent the apprentices from thinking too much about it. You continue working the gesso, long smooth strokes, the surface taking shape under your hands, the San Frediano arrests, the journeyman Luca mentioned, and now officers in the street again, the familiar calculus, the weight of it, settling. After the evening bell, when the workshop day ends and Maestro goes upstairs and the apprentices clean the tools and the space in preparation for tomorrow, you and Luca carry the cleaned grinding stones back to their shelf together. It's a practical task. 2 stones, 2 people, nothing unusual. "He'll be all right," Luca says quietly, not looking at you. "The one in San Frediano. The family paid. For now." "For now," he agrees. You set the stone on the shelf. He sets his beside it. Your hands are close but not touching. "After the commission is finished," Luca says, even more quietly, almost nothing. "When Maestro is in a good mood. I know someone who knows Ser Piero, who knows the circle." You don't respond immediately. You're looking at the shelf, at the ranked stones, at the order of the workshop. "Let me think," you say again. But this time it means something different. This time the thinking already has a direction. Here is what you know about the world you're in. You know that Lorenzo de' Medici, who is 34 years old and dying slowly of gout, but doesn't know yet how slowly, rules Florence through a combination of genuine cultural generosity, political intelligence, and the kind of informal power that doesn't need to announce itself. He is not a king. He governs a republic, technically, the ancient institutions of the Republic of Florence still nominally in place. But the Signoria, the elected governing council, defers to him. The guilds defer to him. The patronage network he has built over the past 15 years means that almost every significant artist, philosopher, architect, and humanist scholar in Florence is either directly employed by him or owes him favours, which amounts to the same thing. Botticelli, who is 40 now, has been the Medici house painter in some sense for years. The Birth of Venus, which you've seen twice, once in the Medici villa at Castello and once in reproduction, came out of this relationship. Ghirlandaio, who has the largest workshop in Florence, and the Tornabuoni commission that your maestro is also working on, different parts of the same chapel, a detail that adds a professional competitive tension to the city's social fabric, is deep in the Medici orbit. Verrocchio, the great sculptor and painter in whose workshop Leonardo spent years, is entangled with Medici commissions going back decades. This is the world above you, above your workshop, above your station, but it touches you. Maestro Benedetto has clients who have Medici connections, and those connections mean that the workshop's work is occasionally shown in contexts where important people see it. The Tornabuoni commission is the biggest thing Maestro has had, and the Tornabuoni family is old money, deeply embedded in Medici Florence, which means this work will be seen by people with influence. And Luca's cousin Piero moves in the circle of young men around Lorenzo. Not the inner circle, but the outer ring. The scholars and minor poets and artists in training who attend the informal dinners that Lorenzo holds at his various properties. Men who have heard Ficino speak. Men for whom the vocabulary of Neoplatonic love is not academic but personal. Men who navigate Florence in the way Luca is suggesting. Not entirely hidden, not entirely visible, existing in the protected space between. You think about this on the way back through the city to the workshop after a message you've been sent to deliver near the Mercato Nuovo later in the week. A separate errand, separate day. September now, the air beginning to change. The brutal edge of August softening slightly toward the more hospitable heat of early autumn. The Mercato Nuovo, the new market, which is not particularly new, founded 150 years ago, but new relative to the Mercato Vecchio, which is ancient, built on the foundations of the old Roman Forum. The Mercato Nuovo trades in the expensive things, gold, silver, finished silk, the luxury goods of a city that produces them and consumes them with equal enthusiasm. The loggia that houses it is open on all sides, the stone arches surrounding an open space where the merchants do their business under the high barrel vault. The sound of commerce bouncing off the stone. In the centre of the loggia floor, embedded in the stone, the porphyry disc where bankrupts were once publicly shamed. The debtors who could not pay would be brought here, required to bare their buttocks and strike the porphyry with them 3 times. The ritual humiliation witnessed by everyone in the market. Publicamente, publicly, the city watching, learning. The practice has faded now, mostly. But the stone is still there. You step over it on your way through. The message you're delivering is to a cloth merchant named Ser Bernardo Corsini, a client of Maestro's who commissions occasional work and who is significant enough that Maestro doesn't send Gianni. Ser Bernardo is a man of 50 with a reputation for precision, meaning he is the kind of client who notices when things are exactly right and is disappointed when they're only very good. His premises are on the south side of the loggia. You find them, give the message, receive the reply with the formality the errand requires, and are done in 5 minutes. Then you take the long way back. The long way today takes you through a part of Florence you've been in before, but not recently. East of the Bargello, the fortress prison courthouse that sits at the heart of civic Florence. Its massive stone block presence unmistakable in the streetscape, a building that is primarily a courthouse and administrative centre, but is also a prison, and its tower is one of the landmarks of the city, visible from many angles, the Bargello. Where the officers of the night have some of their offices, you don't look at it directly as you pass. This is irrational. The building cannot see you. The officers of the night at this hour on this day are processing paperwork or interviewing witnesses or eating their midday meal in the administrative offices of the Republic's justice system. They are not standing at the windows watching young men from Prato walk past on ordinary errands. But you feel the building anyway, the way you feel the Tamburo boxes. There are things you cannot afford to be naive about. Here is one of them. The officers of the night are not entirely unjust, or at least they are not entirely random. The targeting of their investigations follows patterns. They go harder in some neighbourhoods than others. They respond to reports with varying intensity depending on the social status of the accused and the accuser. A wealthy merchant's son caught in a tavern in the wrong situation with the wrong person might receive a fine and a quiet conversation. A journeyman from the wool trade in the same situation with no family connections might receive considerably worse. The protection that Luca is talking about is real. The circle of educated young men around Lorenzo and the Platonic Academy has a kind of de facto immunity, not written down anywhere, not official, but present in the way that many important things in Florence are present, as an understanding among people who matter. You're not yet one of those people, but Maestro's workshop is connected to that circle through the patrons. And Luca knows Piero, and Piero knows people. The question is whether the connection is close enough, stable enough, to actually provide protection, or whether it's the kind of thing that looks like protection from a distance and dissolves when you get close to it. You've seen that kind of thing too. You walk past the Bargello without looking at it. You take the back streets toward the workshop. The city moves around you. Ordinary, beautiful, continuous. I want a life, not a hidden thing, a life. You're going to have to decide what you want more, the life you currently have, small and careful and possible, or the life that might be available if you're willing to risk the one you have. This is the arithmetic that never resolves. You're going to have to resolve it. The Tornabuoni Chapel Commission reaches its critical phase in October. Let me tell you about this commission, because it tells you something about how Florence works that is important to understand. The Tornabuoni family are old Florentine nobility, which in Florence means they've been important for so long that they don't need to announce it anymore. They have been bankers, merchants, politicians, the kind of dynasty that has survived the Guelph-Ghibelline Wars and the Plague and the Ciompi Uprising and the various convulsions of Florentine politics by being consistently useful to whoever is in power, while also being genuinely powerful themselves. Giovanni Tornabuoni, who is in charge of the family interests and is Lorenzo de' Medici's maternal uncle, has decided that the family chapel in Santa Maria Novella needs new frescoes. The old frescoes are by Orcagna, 14th century, masterworks in their time. Giovanni has decided that the family deserves something more current, more in the mode of the new art that Florence is producing, and he is willing to pay for it. The commission has gone primarily to Ghirlandaio. This is the obvious choice. Ghirlandaio is the most technically accomplished fresco painter in Florence. His workshop is the largest and best organised, and he has the kind of relationship with the Medici and their circle that makes this kind of major civic commission natural. But the chapel is large and the deadline is ambitious, and Ghirlandaio, who is 40 now, and at the peak of his reputation, has also offered workshop space and certain preparatory work to allied painters. This is how the commissions work at this level. The primary artist takes the credit, but the major cycles are collaborative in ways that the signatures and contracts don't always reveal. Maestro Benedetto has a piece of this, not a large piece, but a piece, certain preparatory work on the decorative borders, and the possibility of contributing to background elements in one of the lesser scenes. What this means for the workshop is, the pace has changed, the quality of attention has changed. Everyone works harder when the work might end up somewhere important. The grinding takes longer because it has to be right. The gesso has to be perfect. The drawings that Maestro makes and remakes late in the evening, the candle burned low on the work table, have the particular tension of work being made under genuine pressure. It also means visitors. People come to the workshop, representatives of the Tornabuoni family to look at progress on the preliminary work. A representative of Ghirlandaio's workshop, a journeyman named Benedetto da Maiano, who is polite and professional and has eyes that assess everything quickly and precisely. And once only, the man himself. Ghirlandaio comes to the workshop on a Thursday in late October. You know he's coming because Maestro tells you the day before and spends the evening reorganizing the workshop in a way that is not quite tidying up but is definitely about presenting the space to best advantage. He moves certain work into better light. He puts the best recent panels forward. He cleans his own bench, which he never does. Ghirlandaio arrives at 11 in the morning with 2 of his own apprentices. He is, in person, quieter than his reputation suggests. 40, with the build of a man who has spent decades doing physical work, hands that show it, face that shows it. He looks at the preparatory work with the comprehensive assessment of someone who can see quality at a glance, and is not interested in politeness about its absence. He does not find its absence. He spends 15 minutes in the workshop. He asks Maestro 2 questions about pigment preferences. He looks at your gold burnishing work on the panel from last month, which is still in the workshop waiting for delivery. Good, he says to Maestro, meaning the gold. Not to you. You are furniture during this visit, present and invisible, which is correct. But Luca, who is across the workshop preparing grounds, catches your eye for half a second when Ghirlandaio's back is turned. Good, he mouths it, soundlessly. You look back at what you're doing, but something has expanded in your chest, taking up more room than it had before. After Ghirlandaio leaves, Maestro spends an hour sitting at his bench doing nothing visible, which is what he does when he's thinking hard. Then he calls you over. The gold borders on the chapel work will need someone with your touch, he says. I'm sending you to Ghirlandaio's workshop next week to work with their gilder. His name is Matteo. He's been doing this 20 years. You'll learn things. A week in Ghirlandaio's workshop. This is not a small thing. This is movement in the city's craft world. Movement that means your work has been seen and found adequate by someone whose opinion defines adequate for Florence. You thank him, with appropriate, not excessive gratitude. That evening, in the hour before supper, when the workshop is quiet and the light is fading, Luca finds you at the well in the courtyard. I heard, he says. Maestro just told me. Matteo is good, honest man. A pause. He also knows Piero. Of course he does. Florence is a city of 50,000 people where every circle overlaps with every other. Luca, you say, quietly, the way you say everything now. I'm not pressing you, he says. But he is, slightly, not badly, not unfairly. I know, you say. The well handle is cold in the evening air. The first chill of autumn, the city changing again under you, toward the winter that will bring the frozen river and the frost fares and the particular cold of sleeping in the attic room with the wind coming through the gap in the shutter. Tell me what you're afraid of, Luca says. Not a challenge, a question. You think about it. I'm afraid of being wrong about the protection, you say. I'm afraid of climbing into a circle that looks safe from outside and finding out that the protection only covers certain people in certain situations, and we are not those people. Luca's quiet, listening. I'm afraid, you say, of losing what we have. What we have, Luca says, is a courtyard behind a church. What we have is real, you say, even if it's small? He looks at you. The evening light is going, the courtyard already in shadow, the sky above still pale blue. It's real, he agrees. I'm not saying it isn't. A pause. I'm saying I want more room for it, he says. You understand this. You understand it completely. The courtyard is real and true, and also the smallest possible container for the thing it holds. After the chapel work, you say, when Maestro is pleased, when I've met Matteo and know the lay of it, then we'll talk about Piero. He nods. This is a real yes. Both of you know it. You carry the water back inside. Ghirlandaio's workshop is larger than Maestro's in almost every dimension. The building is near Santa Maria Novella, the church where the chapel is, which makes sense for a workshop whose primary current occupation is a large fresco cycle in that building. The scale is different. Where Maestro's space is one main room and a storage area and a small back courtyard, Ghirlandaio's fills a building of 3 floors, with separate rooms for different stages of the work. The ground floor for the messy preparation work, mixing plaster and gesso and pigments in quantity. The first floor for the actual painting, the panels and stretched canvases in various stages of progress. The second floor, which you see only briefly, for the large cartoon drawings that serve as templates for the fresco work. You arrive on a Monday morning, introduced by Maestro in a brief note that you carry to the journeyman who opens the door, and you are installed in the gilding corner of the first floor with a speed that makes clear your visit has been planned and your station in it is understood. Matteo is 50, stocky, hair going grey at the temples, hands that have been doing this specific thing for so long that his fingers carry the permanent slight stiffness of repetitive fine work. He looks at you with the assessing expression of a man who has trained a number of people and has learned to read potential quickly. You've done burnishing before, he says, not a question. 2 years. Maestro Benedetto trained you. Yes. His gold work is good. His grip technique is wrong, but his work is good. A pause. I'm going to show you something about the grip that will save your hands when you're 40. You can take it back to him if you want, but he probably won't use it. This is delivered without any apparent criticism. It's simply information. You realize within minutes that Matteo is one of those craftspeople for whom the work itself is the only real subject. He doesn't care about social positioning. He cares about what the gold does under the stone. You spend the week learning from him. What Matteo knows about gold is several levels deeper than what you have already learned. The preparation of the bowl, which is the red clay ground beneath the gold, has variables that you haven't been taught. The temperature of the room matters. The humidity of the air matters in ways that are not obvious until you see what happens when you don't account for them. The angle of the burnishing stone to the gold surface is not fixed but varies depending on the kind of gold, the kind of bowl, the kind of panel. These variations are not huge, but they're the difference between gold that sits well and gold that sings. You pay attention with the kind of attention you rarely need to deploy fully. Everything Matteo shows you goes somewhere deep and stays there. The workshop around you is also an education of a different kind. Ghirlandaio's apprentices are different from maestros. Not better, not worse. Different. More numerous. More stratified. The older ones have a confidence that comes from working in the most sought-after workshop in Florence. A confidence that occasionally tips into arrogance with the ones who aren't as good as they think they are. But the ones who are good are very good, and watching them work is genuinely instructive. Among them, on the third day, you meet Giuliano. Giuliano is 17, from Genoa, sent to Florence specifically for this workshop. He has the particular intensity of a young person who has made a large bet on a future and is in the process of finding out if the bet was right. He asks good questions. He watches you work with Matteo without being asked. Not intrusively, but with a kind of technical hunger that you recognize. On the fourth day, he asks you something about the burnishing angle while Matteo is elsewhere. You explain. He tries it. It works. You're from Maestro Benedetto's workshop, he says. Yes. What's he like? Demanding. Fair. Better than he knows, probably. Giuliano nods, filed away. There's a gathering on Friday evening, he says, in a different tone. Still even, still conversational. At the house near the Ponte Santa Trinita. The kind of thing that... He pauses. The kind of thing that certain people find interesting. You look at the gold under your hands. What kind of people? The kind who read Ficino, he says, who find the Academy's ideas worth thinking about. The phrasing is careful, precisely the kind of careful you've learned to recognize. You say nothing for a moment. Who organizes it, you ask? A man named Ser Francesco. He has connections to Piero de' Medici, and through him to the Circle. Piero de' Medici, Lorenzo's son, 18 years old, who will eventually run Florence so badly that the city throws him out, but right now is simply a young man with a famous father, and the kind of social capital that comes with the name. My friend knows Piero, you say. Giuliano looks at you. Your friend should come, he says. You finish the burnishing stroke. The gold catches the light at the angle you've been working toward all afternoon. Tell me where, you say. You go back to the workshop that evening and you tell Luca. Not everything. You tell him enough. The gathering, the name Ser Francesco, the Friday evening. I know the house, Luca says, very quietly. Piero has been there. Giuliano says it's safe. Luca is quiet for a moment. The specific quiet of someone who is thinking about how much safety actually covers. Safe as these things are, he says. Yes, that's not entirely safe. No, you agree. You look at each other. In the workshop in the late afternoon with Gianni somewhere in the back room and Salvo gone to deliver something. The panel between you, the work in progress, the ordinary objects of ordinary work. Friday, Luca says. Friday. This is the moment where you decide. Not the gathering itself. Not yet. But the decision to go to it, which is its own kind of step across a line. The decision to move from the small, careful, possible life toward the other thing, the larger and more dangerous and possibly more real thing. You feel the decision settle in you. Not comfortable, not uncomfortable. The weight of something true. All right, you say. All right, he says. The work continues. The panel is waiting. Friday comes with rain, which is both good and bad. Good because the streets are emptier, and anyone out in the evening has a plausible reason to be moving quickly with a hat pulled down. Bad because Florence in the rain is a particular kind of miserable. The stone streets becoming channels for water that has nowhere to go except downhill toward the Arno. The overhanging buildings providing some shelter, but guaranteeing a steady drip at the edge of every roof that will hit you precisely on the back of the neck if you walk too close to the walls. You leave the workshop separately. This is agreed without being discussed. Luca leaves first, on an errand that doesn't require explanation. You follow 20 minutes later, wrapped in your heaviest coat. The house near the Ponte Santa Trinita is not difficult to find if you know the neighbourhood, and Luca knows the neighbourhood. You find each other at the bridge, where the rain is coming hard off the Arno and 2 fishermen have given up and are carrying their equipment home under a makeshift canopy of sacking. "Ready?" Luca says. His hair is wet from the rain. He looks like himself, which is to say he looks exactly as he does every day, and also somehow intensified by the context, by the fact that you're doing this. "Ready," you say. The house is in the Oltrarno, set back slightly from the street in a small courtyard that the rain has turned into a series of puddles. The door is ordinary wooden iron bound, a lamp above it. From inside, faintly, voices and the smell of wood smoke and wine. You knock. A servant opens it, young, efficient, neutral. He looks at you both. "Giuliano," you say. "He invited me." A pause. Then, "Come in." The interior resolves from the rain and the darkness into warmth and candlelight and a room full of men. Not a large room, not a large gathering. Maybe 15 people, spread between the main room and what appears to be an adjoining one. The connecting door open. The ages vary more than you expected, from young men who look like apprentices or students to men in their 30s, and one older man, 50 perhaps, with the calm, unhurried quality of someone for whom this kind of gathering is familiar territory. Giuliano finds you immediately, which means he was watching for you. "You came," he says. He looks at Luca with assessment and then with something warmer. "And this is your friend." "Luca." Giuliano introduces himself then. "Come, there's wine. Ser Francesco wants to talk." Ser Francesco is the older man. He has a narrow, intelligent face, the face of a scholar or a lawyer, and hands that hold his wine cup with the easy relaxation of a man in his own space. He greets you with the particular warmth of a host who is genuinely glad to see people arrive, not performatively so. "You work with Matteo," he says to you, "this week. He's been generous with what he knows. He is. His work is in 3 churches in Florence that nobody will ever stop talking about." A pause. "And you're the friend Giuliano mentioned." Luca introduces himself. Ser Francesco listens to the family name, the origin. "Benedetto's workshop," he says. "Yes, the Tornabuoni work. I've heard it's going well." "We hope so," Luca says. "The wine is good. Better than anything you buy for yourself. A deep red from somewhere south. Warm in the mouth. With a particular quality that you don't have a word for, but that feels like the concentrated attention of a warm afternoon in summer. The room settles around you. People talk. The conversations overlap in the way of rooms where everyone has enough shared vocabulary to jump between topics, classical references and workshop gossip, and the kind of philosophical discussion that in Florence can erupt anywhere, at any dinner table, at any gathering where 2 people with education end up next to each other. A young man near the window is talking about a translation of the Symposium, specifically about Socrates' speech about Eros, the speech where love is described as the love of immortality, the desire of the soul to participate in something that doesn't end. He's speaking with the intensity of someone for whom this is not academic. Near him, Another young man is listening with an expression you know, the expression of someone in a room where they can stop performing for a moment. You understand it completely. It's the expression you can feel on your own face. Luca at your shoulder has gone slightly still. The kind of still that means he's taking something in. You stay for 2 hours. You talk with Giuliano about the workshop and about Matteo's technique and about what it means to be learning craft in a city that is doing what Florence is doing with craft. You talk briefly with the young man from the window, whose name is Ser Andrea, and who has actually read the symposium in Greek, which puts him in a category of education you don't occupy, but can appreciate. And at one point near the fire, Ser Francesco sits down next to you while Luca's across the room and says something that you will think about for a long time. He says, "I know the workshops, I know the city, I know the stakes. The people who come here are people who understand the stakes." He looks at you with clear, steady eyes. "The protection is not absolute," he says. "Nothing is absolute. But there are circles in this city that are safer than others, and the reason they're safer is that the people inside them have spent 30 years building that safety through very careful cultivation of the right relationships. Ficino understands this, Lorenzo understands this. The protection is a function of the relationships." He pauses. "You're both young. You have skill and you have the right patron and you're building the right connections. The question is whether you're willing to build them consciously." He says it without pressure, without performance. The way a man says something true that he has said before and will say again, because it remains true. You think about the courtyard behind the church, the stone bench, the fig tree. You think about the tamburo on the wall of the baptistry. You think about, "I want a life, not a hidden thing. A life." What does consciously mean, you ask? "It means showing up," he says. "Here, other places like this, being known, being part of the fabric of it. Not hiding everything, not being reckless, but also not being invisible, because invisible isn't actually safe. Invisible is what you are when you don't matter to the people who could protect you." He stands up and moves to talk to someone else. You sit with the wine in your hand and look at the fire. Later, walking back through the wet streets, you and Luca are quiet for a block or two. The rain has lessened. The puddles are everywhere, reflecting the scattered lights from the windows above. "Well," Luca says. "Well," you say. "Ser Francesco." "Yes." "He's right," Luca says. "I know," you say. Another half a block. "This doesn't make it safe," you say. "It makes it less dangerous. There's a difference." "I know that. And it's not guaranteed. The protection depends on the relationships, and the relationships can—" "I know," Luca says. You stop at a corner, the wet stones gleaming under the single lamp on the building above. A cat moves across the street, ignoring you completely, its business entirely its own. "Okay," you say. He looks at you. "Okay," you say again. "We build the relationships. We come back. We're part of the fabric of it." A pause. "We're careful, and we're not invisible, and we see what kind of life that makes." Luca looks at you for a moment. In the lamplight, in the rain-washed street, with Florence going about its ordinary nighttime business around you. "Yes," he says, simply. Not the answer to a question. Just, yes. This is what it is. You walk back to the workshop together through the quiet streets. Not touching, never touching in the street, but together in the particular way you've learned, in the same rhythm, the same direction, the same understanding of what the city around you holds and what it might offer. The workshop is dark when you get back. Maestro and his wife have been asleep for hours. Gianni's faint snoring is audible through the floorboards. Salvo's breath, regular and deep. You and Luca go up the stairs, quietly, the way you know how. You separate at the top, each to your own palette, the ordinary distances of the ordinary room. The night is still. Florence is still, or as still as Florence gets, which means the nighttime sounds instead of the daytime sounds, distant and muffled and present. You lie on your back and look at the ceiling you've looked at for 2 years and 8 months. You're going to go back to that house. You know this now. You're going to build the relationships that Ser Francesco described. You're going to be present in the part of the city that offers the closest thing this city can offer to a life that isn't hidden. This is a decision. It's also an acknowledgement of what you want, which is harder than the decision. Wanting something this specifically, this concretely, in a city that doesn't officially allow it, requires a kind of steadiness that you've been developing without knowing that was what you were doing. Across the room, Luca's breathing has slowed to the rhythm of sleep. He fell asleep quickly, the way he always does, his particular gift. You don't fall asleep quickly. You lie there and think about Florence, about this city you've been in for nearly 3 years now, about what it is and what it could be. Here is what Florence is right now, in this moment, in this specific, impossible, beautiful city. It is a city that has put the face of God on the ceiling of the baptistry in gold mosaic, and the face of desire in the paintings coming out of every workshop. It is a city that has built a dome that solved a problem nobody thought was solvable. It is a city that has put anonymous boxes on its church walls because it fears certain kinds of love. And it is also a city where a man named Ficino is writing about the divinity of love between souls, and a circle of young men is gathering on Friday evenings to read Plato and talk about what life could be, and the most powerful man in the city is not above understanding that beauty in all its forms is a kind of argument about what human beings are worth. These things are all true at once, the marble and the tamburo, the philosophy and the officers, the beautiful and the dangerous. This is the city you live in. This is the city that is making you into whoever you're going to become. You can't hold only the beauty and ignore the danger. You also can't hold only the danger and miss the beauty. The city requires you to carry both, the way it carries both, in the same hands, at the same time. You've been carrying the danger alone for 2 years, being careful, being invisible, being the small and protected version of yourself. Now you're going to try something different. You're going to try being part of something, part of the city's own complicated argument about what it allows and what it loves. Whether it works is not something you can know tonight, but you've made the decision, and in the morning you'll wake up in the same room, in the same city, under the same bells, and you'll go down and start the fire and make the water ready and begin another day. Tonight, though, tonight is just this. The sounds of Florence doing its nighttime work, the distant bells. Somewhere further away, the river, which you can't actually hear from here, but which is present anyway. The way the city's major things are always present. The river and the dome and the deep old stone and all of it, existing whether you're attending to it or not. Your eyes are heavy now. The fire of the decision has settled into warmth. The ceiling above you is the same ceiling. The room is the same room. The city is the same city. But something in the arrangement of how you sit in it has shifted just slightly, in the way that things shift when you've stopped pretending they might go differently than they will. Let sleep come. Let the sounds of Florence soften and become the background they always are. The bells and the carts and the river and the distant voices of people whose lives are entirely their own. Tomorrow, the workshop, the gold, the work that Maestro will assess with his particular silence that means good. Tomorrow, the city, the streets that know your feet by now, the Arno in the morning light, the fig trees in the courtyards of churches you've made yours. Tomorrow, Luca, in the workshop, at the stone bench, in whatever configuration the city allows, which is not everything and is also not nothing. You close your eyes. The darkness is full and soft, the kind of darkness you've learned to trust. Florence keeps going outside the walls of this attic room, keeps making itself, remaking itself, the terrible and the beautiful in their permanent argument about what a city is. You are sleeping in the middle of it. The Renaissance is happening in the workshops and the academies and the church chapels and the patrons' homes. It's happening in the Platonic conversations and in the paint drying on the panels and in the gold that catches the candlelight in the churches and makes people look up. It's also happening here, in this room, in the decision you made tonight, that people loved each other in this city, that they found ways to be real in the margins of a place that didn't officially allow it, that the beauty was made by people with full human lives, not saints, not abstractions. People who are afraid and also brave and also unglamorous and also sometimes extraordinary. That's not a footnote. That's the story. Centuries will pass after this room. Florence will change beyond what you could imagine. The streets widened and the buildings rebuilt, and the Great Plague and the exile of the Medici and the Republic restored and lost again, and all the long convulsions of Italian history following each other like waves. The chapel that Ghirlandaio is painting right now, that your work will touch in its small way, will stand in Santa Maria Novella for 500 years. People will look at it who cannot imagine what it was to stand in Florence in 1483 with gold powder on your hands and your whole life ahead of you, and a decision you'd just made thrumming in your chest. But those people will still be looking for the same things that everyone in every city in every year is looking for, which is some combination of beauty and work and connection, and the courage to want the life that's actually yours. Some things don't change. The human need for this doesn't change. The ache of it, the courage it takes. Let that be enough for tonight. The bells mark an hour you're too tired to count. The darkness is complete and kind. You're warm enough, safe enough, real enough. And tomorrow and the day after and the long days of this life still taking shape. You'll be here, in this city, making your way in the way you've decided to make it. That's enough. Sleep now. Let Florence keep its vigil. Let the tamburo stand in the wall and the philosophy ring in the academies and the gold dry in the chapels and the dome stand above everything, that impossible dome, solving the problem everyone said couldn't be solved. Let the fig tree drop its fruit in the courtyard behind the small church. Let the river run green and low in the August heat, and flood in the winter and run clear in the spring when the mountains release it. Let all of it be what it is, and let you sleep in the middle of it. This boy from Prato who came here with a letter of introduction and hands that had learned the grip of a brush and found something larger than he came looking for and decided to reach for it. That's the story. That's enough. Good night.